You got fat, her ex sneered, until he saw she was pregnant with the Alpha King's heir. A mist clung to the cobblestones, curling around the feet of the few citizens who dared wander at this late hour. Lady Seraphine walked through it like a ghost returned, her cloak drawn tightly around her, hiding the gentle swell of her belly. Years away from this city had changed her, softened her in some ways, yet hardened her in others. She moved with a quiet dignity, each step deliberate, echoing softly in the empty streets. Seraphine had once been a courtier of no small reputation. Her laughter had lit up halls of marble, and her sharp wit had unnerved even the proudest lords. But the court, with its endless whispers and cruel comparisons, had turned its back on her. She had left, heartbroken, betrayed by those she trusted most. And now she returned, not for revenge, not yet, but because her destiny had taken root in ways no exile could deny. The first face she saw upon entering the great hall was one she had hoped never to see again. Lord Dorian, tall, handsome, and cruel in his pride, lounged by the fire with that same arrogant smirk she remembered too well. The moment his eyes fell on her, the smirk widened. "You've grown," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Quite a change, Seraphine." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She could feel the court's eyes turning toward her, whispers rising like the hiss of the wind through the towers. Every ounce of her control tightened, but she refused to tremble. "I have," she said softly, her voice steady. "Changed, yes. Stronger perhaps, but not broken." The room held its breath. Dorian's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, and Seraphine's heart swelled, not with relief, but with the quiet fire of satisfaction. Years of his condescension, his thoughtless cruelty, and the way he had once spoken over her as if her thoughts were air, she could finally meet him without fear. But there was more. Dorian's gaze flicked lower, a spark of surprise, disbelief, and confusion flashing across his features. For the first time he seemed truly unsettled. Her hand brushed the side of her cloak. Beneath it life stirred, the child growing within her, a secret that no whisper in the court could steal. The murmurs began. "The Alpha King's heir," someone breathed, barely above a whisper, and the hall seemed to contract around her. Dorian's sharp laugh failed to mask his shock. What is this?" he demanded, his voice no longer dripping with mockery. His confidence had cracked, revealing the vulnerability of a man who realized he no longer held power over her. Seraphine met his gaze without flinching. "It is life," she said simply, "and it is mine." The court erupted in whispers. Some were scandalized, others fascinated. Few dared meet her eyes. Seraphine's pulse thrummed with a quiet victory. She had returned as a woman who carried the weight of destiny in her womb and the strength of exile in her heart. She was no longer the girl Dorian had scorned. That evening, she met with her loyal attendants in a quiet chamber overlooking the palace gardens. The moonlight spilled over her face, pale and serene, casting long shadows that danced like spirits among the carved stone columns. Her maid, Leora, knelt beside her. "My lady," Leora said softly, "the court cannot stop speaking. They do not know whether to fear or admire you." Seraphine let out a slow breath. "They will fear me soon enough, but admiration that they can keep. It is a dangerous game to rely on admiration." Her gaze drifted to the window, where the wind moved the silver leaves of the ancient trees. "Dorian, he will not leave me in peace. Not until he understands that he no longer controls me." The next morning, the great hall was alive with the buzz of the court. Lords and ladies whispered in corners, eyes darting toward Seraphine as she entered, elegant and unyielding in a cloak of deep midnight blue. She moved with the certainty of someone who knew the truth of her power, even if no one else could see it yet. At the far end of the hall, Dorian watched, his expression unreadable. He had tried to mask his unease with a polite bow, but it faltered as Seraphine approached. The murmur of her pregnancy had already reached him, carried on the tongues of servants and courtiers alike. "Seraphine," he said, voice tight, controlled, but lacking the ease of superiority he had once wielded. You are well." She inclined her head. "I am," she said, the corners of her mouth lifting in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "And you?" Dorian's eyes flicked to her belly again, betraying the storm of emotions he tried to hide. Confusion, envy, perhaps even a hint of fear. He swallowed hard, but no words followed. That silence, heavier than any insult he had thrown at her before, spoke louder than his voice ever could. A hush fell over the hall as the Alpha King, Kalen, entered. He was a figure of quiet power, his presence commanding without arrogance. Clad in a robe of deep crimson, adorned with silver embroidery that caught the light like fire on water, he moved through the hall with a steady grace. The murmurs quieted further. No one dared speak out of turn in his presence. Kalen's eyes found Seraphine's. They lingered there, unspoken, acknowledging a bond that the court could neither define nor interrupt. There was tension, yes, but also respect. And something more, an undercurrent of recognition that Seraphine herself felt. "You return at an interesting time," Kalen said, his voice low but carrying through the hall. "The kingdom shifts like the tide, and yet some things remain constant." His gaze swept over the court, then lingered on Seraphine. "Some truths cannot be ignored." Her heart stirred, a mixture of awe and apprehension. She understood the weight behind his words. The child she carried was no ordinary life. It was a symbol of alliance, power, and perhaps the hope of something the kingdom had long lost. As the day turned to evening, Seraphine found herself walking through the palace gardens once more. The air was crisp, the scent of night flowers curling like smoke around the stone paths. She paused by a fountain, the water reflecting the moon in trembling silver patterns. Here alone, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The years of exile, the pain of betrayal, the quiet nights spent wondering if she would ever find her place again, all of it settled in her chest like stones. But with the child inside her, there was also warmth, a new kind of hope. This life, fragile and yet fierce, demanded courage she had never known before. She heard footsteps on the stone path and turned to see Kalen approaching. His expression was unreadable as always, yet she sensed the faintest tremor of curiosity, or perhaps concern. "Do you fear what the court thinks of you?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper among the rustling leaves. Seraphine shook her head. "I do not fear them," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I fear only what I cannot protect." Kalen's gaze softened, though his posture remained regal and distant. "Then you are wise. Fear can be a guide, if you let it show you the edges of the world you must guard." For a moment, silence fell between them. The fountain gurgled, the leaves shivered, and the night held its breath. Seraphine realized how much she longed for an ally in this place, someone who could see the truth beneath the whispers. Kalen was no friend yet, no lover yet, but perhaps a protector of the fragile life she carried. Suddenly, the distant laughter of the court pierced the night. Seraphine stiffened, a chill crawling along her spine. She knew Dorian would not let the day end without some attempt to undermine her, to sow doubt or scandal. Kalen noticed the tension, his hand brushing slightly near hers, not touching, but close enough to remind her of presence and strength. "Do not let them weaken you," he said quietly. "You have returned not to hide but to endure, and endure you must for the sake of what comes next." Seraphine nodded, drawing a slow, steady breath. The path ahead was dangerous, lined with whispers, envy, and shadowed intentions. But for the first time in years, she felt a quiet certainty. She would not be the girl who trembled in the halls of the court. She would be the woman who carried the hope of kings, the heir of shadows and light. And as she turned back toward the palace, the moon catching the edges of her cloak, she knew the first confrontation was only the beginning. Dorian had seen the child. The court had begun to whisper, and destiny, long patient and patient, had begun to stir. The night held a promise and a warning. This was only the first step of a journey that would test her strength, her heart, and her courage in ways she could scarcely imagine. And somewhere deep within the shadows of the palace, eyes watched her, calculating, waiting. The game had begun. The palace was alive with whispers the morning after Seraphine's return. The sunlight fell on the stone walls in long, gold-streaked lines, illuminating the grandeur of the halls, but it could not warm the chill of suspicion and curiosity that filled the air. Courtiers moved carefully, bowing and curtsying, their eyes darting toward her every step. The rumor of her pregnancy had spread like wildfire, carried in hushed voices from chamber to chamber. Seraphine walked with measured grace through the main corridor, her hands gently resting on her cloak where her unborn child slept, unaware of the storm gathering around them. She felt the weight of every gaze, the mixture of awe and judgment pressing against her like invisible chains. Yet she held her head high. She was no longer a girl at the mercy of the court's cruelty. She was a mother-to-be, carrying a life that could change everything. At the end of the corridor, Kaelin awaited. The Alpha King was a figure carved from shadow and fire, his presence commanding yet strangely gentle when he turned his attention toward her. He wore a cloak of midnight embroidered with silver threads, glinting faintly as he moved. His eyes, sharp and calculating, softened slightly as they met hers. "Seraphine," he said, voice steady and deep, "you return with more than courage. You return with responsibility." She inclined her head, uncertain whether his words were a warning or a recognition of the truth. "I do what I must," she said softly. "The child I carry, it cannot be hidden." Kaelin's gaze lingered on her for a long moment. He was silent, studying the gentle curve of her form, the life growing within her, the unspoken strength in her posture. "The court will not accept this easily," he finally said. "Many will see it as scandal, some as threat. Only a few will understand its meaning." "I understand," she said quietly, "and I will endure as I have endured before." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her in the morning light. The air between them was taut with unspoken words, a tension that neither dared break. "Endure," he repeated, softer this time, almost a whisper. "But know this, endurance alone will not protect you or the child. You will need allies." Seraphine's heart quickened. She had survived betrayal and exile, but she had never been truly alone. "And you," she asked, "will you be one of them?" Kaelin did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied her with an intensity that made her shiver. The Alpha King was not one to give promises lightly, and she felt the weight of his judgment, the power he held over both the kingdom and herself. Finally, he nodded once. "I will be." The morning passed slowly, each hour a trial of patience and diplomacy. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, eyes lingering on Seraphine with fascination and envy. Dorian, her former lover, was particularly restless. He followed her from a distance, his expression a mixture of disbelief and bitterness. He had mocked her before, dismissed her, and now the truth of her pregnancy shook the very foundation of his pride. He approached her in a corridor, his steps quiet but deliberate. "So, the rumors are true," he said, his voice controlled but strained. You carry the Alpha King's child." Seraphine's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "Yes," she said simply, "I do." For a moment he was speechless. Then came the edge of mockery, sharpened by his wounded ego. "And the court allows this?" he asked, disbelief coloring every word. "The court will adjust," she replied, calm yet firm. "It has no choice." Dorian's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger crossing his features. "You think this makes you untouchable?" he asked. "I think it makes me stronger," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "And wiser. I will not be swayed by fear or envy. Not now, not ever." His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Seraphine saw doubt flicker across his proud features. He had always believed he could control her with words or charm, but now she stood before him, unshakable, carrying a life that commanded respect. Meanwhile, Kaelin observed their exchange from a distance. He saw the tension, the subtle power struggle, and the history between them. The Alpha King's expression remained unreadable, but his mind was already calculating the dangers and possibilities. Dorian was clever, ambitious, and unpredictable, but Kalen had faced worse threats than a proud man unprepared for the truth. The day grew longer, and Seraphine found herself in the palace gardens once more. The fountain, carved from marble and adorned with symbols of old magic, glimmered under the sun. She rested by the edge, her fingers tracing the patterns, feeling the pulse of centuries-old power beneath the stone. Kalen joined her, walking silently until he stood beside her. "You are calm," he observed, his voice low. "Even with the entire court watching you, even with him." He gestured subtly toward Dorian, lurking at the edge of the garden. "I have learned to be calm," she replied, her gaze fixed on the water. "Calm allows me to see clearly. Calm allows me to act when others panic." Kalen studied her, noting the depth behind her composure. "You are brave," he said, "but bravery alone will not be enough. There are those who would use fear, jealousy, and suspicion to harm you and the child." Seraphine swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. "I know, but I will not run, I will not hide." Kalen nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the horizon where the mountains loomed, shrouded in mist. "Then you must trust me," he said. "And perhaps trust yourself more than you have in years." The afternoon brought news that unsettled the court further. A royal seer, an ancient woman whose prophecies had shaped the kingdom for decades, requested an audience with Seraphine. The courtiers murmured with apprehension. Seers were respected and feared. Their words carried weight, often mingled with danger. Seraphine entered the seer's chamber, a circular room filled with candles that flickered in the shadows. The air smelled of herbs and smoke, of things forgotten and things yet to come. The seer, bent with age but sharp-eyed, regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. "You carry what others cannot understand," the seer said, her voice a rasp that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. "The child within you is not ordinary. It is a key, a bridge, and perhaps a threat." Seraphine's heart thudded in her chest. She had feared this moment, yet she knew it was inevitable. "A threat?" she asked softly. "To some, yes," the seer replied. "The court will see what they wish. The ambitious will scheme. The fearful will whisper. But you must guide this life, or it will be consumed by the shadows that linger in the corners of power." Seraphine nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. "I will protect it," she said firmly, "no matter the cost." The seer studied her for a long moment, then inclined her head. "Good, but know this, protection requires more than courage. It requires strength you may not yet realize you have." As Seraphine left the chamber, Kalen met her in the corridor. His expression was unreadable, but the faintest curve of concern softened his features. "What did she say?" he asked quietly. "She warned me," Seraphine replied, that our child may bring danger as well as hope, that I must be careful, vigilant." Kalen's gaze darkened, his mind already turning to the unseen threats that loomed over the kingdom. "Then we will prepare," he said, "together." Even as he spoke, Dorian watched from a distance, his eyes burning with a mix of envy and frustration. He could see the bond forming between Seraphine and the Alpha King, could sense the growing power that both frightened and fascinated him. He would not let this stand. He would find a way to reclaim what he believed was his, and to shatter the life Seraphine was building. As night fell, the palace was quiet once more. Seraphine stood on her balcony, looking out over the city. The moon reflected on the river like silver fire, and the wind carried the faint scent of distant forests, of magic and mystery. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the life within her stir. "This child," she whispered to herself, "will know love and courage, and I will do everything to ensure it survives." Footsteps behind her made her turn. Kalen stood there silent, the night wrapping around him like a cloak of shadow. "The court will test you," he said softly, But you are not alone, and neither is the child. She nodded, a mixture of relief and determination settling in her chest. I know, she said. But there is still much to face. Kalen's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. Yes, he said, and whatever comes, we face it together. For a moment, silence fell, filled only with the distant hum of the city and the whisper of wind through the stone towers. And in that silence, Seraphine felt a flicker of hope, small, fragile, yet powerful enough to ignite courage she had thought lost. But beyond the palace walls, in the shadowed corridors, eyes watched. Plans were being made, secrets whispered. And Dorian would not rest until he had taken his revenge, or destroyed everything Seraphine held dear. The night deepened, and the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that was sure to come. And in the quiet of the palace, Seraphine placed her hand over her heart, over the life that depended on her, and whispered a promise she intended to keep. I will protect you, no matter what comes. The mountains beyond the kingdom loomed like ancient sentinels, their peaks lost in swirling mists that never seemed to lift. Tales whispered in the capital spoke of curses and restless spirits, of dangers lurking in every shadow. Yet Seraphine and Kalen moved forward with cautious resolve, for the life she carried depended on what awaited them at the heart of the mountains. Are you certain about this path? Seraphine asked, her hand resting on her belly as they walked along the narrow, rocky trail. The wind tugged at her cloak, cold and biting, carrying a scent of pine and wet stone. Kalen's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet determination. I am certain, he replied. The artifact must be secured. If it falls into the wrong hands, your child, all of us, will be in danger, she sighed, the tension coiling in her chest like a living thing. I did not expect the path to be so lonely or so dangerous. He glanced at her, noticing the faint tremble in her voice. Loneliness and danger are the companions of those who hold power, he said softly. You carry more than anyone else in this kingdom. You must learn to bear it. The trail twisted upward, carved into the side of the mountain, with sheer drops on either side. Seraphine's heart raced, not from fear of the heights, but from the constant awareness of what she carried. Each step was a reminder that the child's life was intertwined with forces far older and stronger than either of them. They reached a plateau as the sun dipped low, casting the peaks in gold and shadow. There, a stone altar stood, ancient and worn, marked with symbols of magic that hummed faintly under their gaze. Kalen stepped forward, his hand brushing the surface. The air shifted and a low hum filled the clearing, vibrating through the stone and into their bones. The artifact is here, Kalen said, his voice reverent. But so too is the curse that guards it. Seraphine's fingers tightened around her cloak. A curse? She asked. Kalen nodded. Old magic, protective but dangerous. It tests the heart and the spirit. Only those with courage, truth, and strength of purpose may claim it. For a moment, silence fell. The wind whispered through the plateau, and the mountains seemed to hold their breath. Seraphine felt a flicker of doubt, a fear she could not ignore. What if she failed? What if the life she carried, the life she had fought so hard to protect, was lost because she was not strong enough? Kalen reached for her hand, his touch firm yet gentle. You are stronger than you know, he said quietly. Fear is natural, but it will not save you. Courage will. Trust yourself. Her heart thrummed in response, and she took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. The fear remained, but it no longer controlled her. She nodded, her eyes meeting his. Then we do this together, she said. As they approached the altar, shadows shifted unnaturally, and the air grew thick with tension. From the darkness emerged a figure, draped in a cloak that seemed woven from smoke itself. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the last rays of the sun. Kalen moved instinctively in front of Seraphine. Step back, he commanded, voice like steel. The figure spoke, a voice that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. Who dares approach the altar of the old magic? Seraphine's heart pounded, but she stepped forward. "I do," she said, her voice steady. "I carry life within me. I seek protection for that life. I ask for the artifact to guard it." The figure's glowing eyes studied her, and the wind swirled violently around them. "Many have come," it said, "but few carry the courage to face what lies within themselves. You must prove your heart is true, your purpose unbroken." Kalen's hand tightened around hers. "Do not falter," he whispered. "You are not alone." The ground trembled beneath their feet as the figure raised its hands, and illusions began to rise around them. Seraphine saw visions of the past, her exile, the pain of betrayal, Dorian's mockery, and moments when she had felt powerless. Each vision cut deep, threatening to shake her resolve. Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced them back. This was not a test of her fear, it was a test of her will. She closed her eyes and focused on the warmth within her, the life growing, fragile yet fierce. That was her truth. That was her purpose. When she opened her eyes, the illusions shifted, showing her not just pain but strength. She saw herself standing tall in the face of cruelty, enduring exile, surviving betrayal. She saw Kalen beside her, steadfast, offering his strength without asking her to surrender her own. The shadowed figure spoke again, voice softer now. "Your heart is true. Your purpose is clear. The artifact is yours, but beware, the path of power is never free from darkness. You will face trials yet to come." Kalen stepped forward, placing his hand on the altar. A glow began to radiate from the ancient stones, wrapping around the artifact that now rested there, a small crystal pulsing with light and warmth. He looked at Seraphine. "Together," he said, and they reached for it at the same time. The glow enveloped them, warm and comforting, and for a moment all fear and doubt seemed to melt away. Seraphine felt a surge of energy, a connection not just to the artifact but to Kalen, to the child, and to the destiny she had once feared she could never embrace. When the light faded, they stood holding the artifact, their hands brushing. The bond between them had deepened, forged in courage and trust. The mountains around them seemed to exhale, and the oppressive tension lifted. But as they turned to leave, a familiar voice echoed through the trees. "Did you really think I would let you succeed so easily?" Dorian stepped from the shadows, his expression dark, eyes gleaming with something sharper than envy, determination, obsession. He had followed them, finding the path to the mountains despite the treacherous terrain. His presence was a reminder that danger did not only come from magic or prophecy, but from human ambition and pride. Kalen stepped in front of Seraphine, his stance protective, his eyes flashing with warning. "You should not have followed us," he said. Dorian smirked, though it was forced, and his gaze swept over Seraphine. "She is strong," he said, voice low, "but not invincible, and she will learn that some things cannot be protected." Seraphine felt a chill, but she straightened her spine. "You have no power here," she said, her voice steady, "and no claim over me. Leave." Dorian laughed, a low, bitter sound. "Oh, I have power, perhaps not over you yet, but over what comes next." Kalen's eyes narrowed. "You will not harm her," he said, voice like steel. "Or you will answer to me." For a moment Dorian hesitated, weighing his options. Then he stepped back, a calculated retreat, but his eyes never left Seraphine. "This is far from over," he said. "Remember that." The wind picked up, swirling around them as he disappeared into the forest shadows, leaving only the echo of his warning. Seraphine exhaled, her chest tight with adrenaline. Kalen placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You were brave," he said softly. "And you faced him without fear. That is strength." "I am frightened," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of him, of what lies ahead, of the life I carry, but I will not let fear control me." Kalen's expression softened. "And you will not. I will stand with you. Always." They began their descent from the mountains, the artifact safely in Kalen's grasp. The journey back was quieter, marked by reflection and cautious hope. Seraphine felt a deep connection to Kalen, a mixture of respect, trust, and something more she did not yet fully name. She knew he was a man of power, capable of commanding armies and bending the will of others. But she also saw his vulnerabilities, the glimpses of a man who could care deeply, who could love fiercely. By the time they returned to the palace, night had fallen. The city glimmered with candlelight, casting shadows that danced across the stone walls. Seraphine felt the weight of the day settle on her shoulders, exhaustion mingling with relief. They had faced danger, confronted shadows, and emerged stronger. Yet even as they entered the palace gates, Seraphine could feel the threads of tension still weaving through the court. Dorian's threat lingered in the air, a reminder that the true trial was only beginning. In her chambers, she placed her hand on her belly, feeling the life within her stir. "We survived today," she whispered, "but tomorrow will bring new challenges, and we must be ready." Kaelin entered, standing silently by the window. The moonlight framed him in silver, making him look almost otherworldly. "You will not face them alone," he said, "and the child will have protection beyond what you can imagine." Seraphine nodded, a flicker of hope shining in her eyes. "Then we continue," she said, "together." Outside, the wind howled through the towers, carrying with it whispers of prophecy and shadow. The path ahead would not be easy, and the trials of power and heart were only beginning. But Seraphine felt a quiet certainty. She had faced darkness before, and with courage and trust, she would face it again. And somewhere in the distance, the first stars appeared, tiny points of light in the vast, shadowed sky. A reminder that even in darkness, hope could shine. The palace was tense with anticipation. Word of Seraphine's return and her child had spread throughout the kingdom, and every corner whispered with intrigue, envy, and fear. Courtiers lingered in shadowed corridors, plotting, watching, waiting for any misstep. Yet inside the walls of her chambers, Seraphine felt only the quiet thrum of determination and the gentle life growing within her. Kaelin entered quietly, his presence steady and commanding, yet gentle with the care he had learned to show her. "The court stirs," he said, eyes scanning the chamber. "Dorian will not rest until he tests us, perhaps even endangers the child." Seraphine touched her belly, a mixture of anxiety and fierce resolve coursing through her. "I know," she said softly, "but we will face him. Together I will not let him or anyone shake what we have built." Kaelin's gaze softened. "You have endured much, more than most, and yet your strength surprises even me." A knock came at the door. One of the palace attendants entered, pale and trembling. "My lord, my lady, the seer, she requests your presence immediately. There is something urgent." Without hesitation, Seraphine and Kaelin followed the attendant through winding corridors. The seer awaited them in her chamber, her sharp eyes gleaming in the candlelight. She gestured for them to sit. "The balance shifts," the seer said, her voice low but unwavering. "The artifact has been claimed, but danger approaches faster than you think. Dorian's ambition is fueled not by love, but by obsession. He will seek to claim what is not his, and he may call upon forces older than this kingdom itself." Seraphine's pulse quickened. "Forces older than the kingdom?" she asked. "Yes," the seer replied. "Magic that has lain dormant, waiting for imbalance to awaken it. Your child is key. If you fail, the kingdom will tremble." Kaelin's expression darkened. "Then we must act swiftly. We cannot wait for danger to find us." The seer nodded. "You must journey to the heart of the palace, the old throne room where the crown of light rests. There the child's protection can be strengthened. But beware, the path will test not only your courage but your hearts." Night had fallen when they entered the throne room. The old hall, rarely used since the founding of the kingdom, was grand and solemn, its stone walls etched with symbols of protection and power. At the center lay the crown of light, glowing faintly with magic that pulsed like the heartbeat of the kingdom itself. As they approached, the shadows in the room seemed to stretch unnaturally. The temperature dropped, and a low hum filled the air. Seraphine instinctively moved closer to Kaelin. "Do not fear," he said softly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." From the darkness emerged a figure cloaked in black with eyes like molten amber. Dorian. He had followed them again, his obsession driving him toward ruin. "Did you truly think you could hide from me?" he asked, voice low and dangerous. "Did you think I would let you build your life while I stood aside?" Seraphine met his gaze calmly. "Your time has passed, Dorian. You no longer hold power over me or anyone else." Dorian laughed, bitter and sharp. "Power is not given, Seraphine. It is taken. And I will take what is mine." Kalen stepped in front of her, his hand brushing against the crown of light. "You will take nothing," he said, voice like steel. "Step away or face consequences you cannot survive." The air around them thickened, charged with magic. The crown of light pulsed brighter, responding to Kalen's command and Seraphine's courage. Dorian's face twisted in frustration. He had relied on cunning, ambition, and manipulation, but now faced something beyond his control: unity, courage, and love. Dorian advanced, and the shadows around him writhed, forming tendrils of dark magic that slithered across the floor. Kalen extended his hand, the artifact they had retrieved earlier glowing with protective light. The room shook as the forces of darkness met forces of protection. Seraphine stepped forward, placing her hand on the crown of light. Warmth surged through her, and she felt the life within her respond, pulsing in harmony with the magic around them. The crown recognized her purpose, her courage, her heart. A brilliant glow enveloped her and Kalen, pushing back the tendrils of shadow that Dorian summoned. Dorian staggered, his dark magic faltering under the combined power of love, courage, and destiny. "This cannot be," he muttered, his voice faltering as he realized his own ambition could not overpower the bond between Seraphine, Kalen, and the child. "You are not alone," Seraphine said, her voice steady, "and you will never control what you cannot understand. Love, courage, and hope, these are stronger than any ambition born of envy." Kalen's eyes blazed with a fierce light as he extended his hand. The artifact and the crown of light combined in a surge of energy that pushed the darkness back completely. Dorian fell to his knees, defeated not by force alone, but by the unyielding power of heart and purpose. For a moment, silence fell. The shadows dissolved, leaving the throne room bathed in pure, radiant light. The crown pulsed gently, as if approving the courage and unity of those who had claimed it. Seraphine looked at Kalen, her chest rising and falling with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," she whispered. Kalen's hand found hers, holding it tightly. "Yes," he said. "But remember, the journey does not end here. Challenges will come, but together we are stronger than any darkness." Dorian, humbled and defeated, rose slowly. His eyes held no malice, only the bitter taste of understanding. "I see now," he said quietly. "You are not the woman I once knew, and the life you carry, I cannot touch it." Seraphine met his gaze, calm yet firm. "Then leave," she said, "and never return to threaten what is not yours." He nodded once, and without another word he turned and left the palace, leaving only silence and the soft glow of the crown. Kalen and Seraphine stood together, their hands intertwined. The crown of light shimmered gently, as if acknowledging the new era that was beginning. The child within her moved, and Seraphine placed her hand over her belly, feeling the connection stronger than ever. "You will be protected," she whispered to the life within her. "No matter what comes, you will be safe." Kalen stepped closer, his forehead resting gently against hers. "And I will stand with you," he said softly. "Always." The palace, once filled with tension and fear, seemed to breathe in relief. The court, the city, and the kingdom would sense the change soon. A new era had begun, not ruled by fear or ambition, but by courage, unity, and hope. Days passed, and the palace adjusted to the new reality. Seraphine moved through the halls with grace and dignity, her presence commanding respect and quiet admiration. Kalen was always nearby, protective yet respectful, offering strength without overshadowing her own. Even Dorian, humbled by defeat, returned to his estates, no longer a threat but a reminder of how ambition unchecked by understanding can falter. One night, Seraphine stood on her balcony, looking at the stars above the kingdom. The wind carried a soft whisper through the towers, as if the mountains and rivers themselves acknowledged the victory and the promise of the future. Kaelin joined her, standing silently at her side. "The path ahead will still hold trials," he said softly, "but we have faced darkness and emerged stronger, and the child will grow in a world that we will protect together." Seraphine smiled, feeling the warmth of hope and love. "Yes," she said, "we have survived the shadows, and together we will face whatever comes next." They stood together, hand in hand, looking out over the city bathed in moonlight. The kingdom was not free from all challenges, but it was alive with new promise. The crown of light glimmered faintly in the distance, a symbol of courage, protection, and the enduring power of heart. Seraphine placed a hand over her heart, over the life growing within her, and whispered a promise. "You are loved, you are safe, and you will shine brighter than any shadow." Kaelin's hand rested over hers, warm and steady. "And I will guide you both," he said, "always." As the night deepened, the palace settled into quiet. Outside, the stars shone like countless points of hope, reminding them that even in the darkest hours, light could prevail. Together, Seraphine and Kaelin would face the future, their hearts united, their courage unwavering, and their love a shield against whatever darkness might arise. And in the quiet of the kingdom, a new dawn waited, bright, promising, and filled with the gentle power of life, hope, and love.